They say the human eye can't see in the dark. But that's not true. The real reason we fear the dark isn't blindness. It's revelation. Because in the absence of light, there are no distractions, just raw truth. And in Pennsylvania, 1856, there was a truth so savage, so surgically buried, that it took the silence of one woman to keep it from swallowing everything. On the surface, her name was Eleanor Blackridge, daughter of a Union general, heiress to a coal dynasty, and the most photographed woman in Philadelphia's elite circles. But behind the silk gloves and lace corsets, behind the mirrors gilded with European gold, Eleanor carried something far more valuable and far more dangerous. A secret, not a scandal. Scandals die with time. But a secret, a real one, it grows. And the secret Eleanor carried was not hers alone. It was rooted in generations of political corruption, medical experimentation, financial manipulation, and a ritual so horrifying it had to be disguised as tradition. When Eleanor vanished on the morning of October 12, 1856, her absence wasn't treated like a tragedy. It was treated like an inconvenience. The newspapers ran a polite headline. Her family issued no statement. Her fiancé boarded a ship to London the same day. And the staff of the Blackridge estate were dismissed by sundown, almost like she had never existed. But one diary entry, ripped from the pages of a private chambermaid's journal, survived. It contained 5 words written in frantic ink. They locked her in room 7. No one ever explained what room 7 was, and no floor plans of the Blackridge estate ever showed more than 6. But every empire has its shadow, and in Pennsylvania's coal-rich Northeast, that shadow had a name. It had a heartbeat. And Eleanor, she wasn't just caught in its web, she was chosen by it. Now ask yourself, how does a woman with wealth, influence, and status vanish without a ripple? Because ripples only happen when someone throws a stone. Eleanor didn't disappear. She was erased. You were never meant to hear this part, because what I'm about to tell you was never written in any official record, never spoken aloud in courtrooms, and never acknowledged in the histories taught in Pennsylvania's finest schools. This was whispered through generations, passed like a cursed heirloom from those who knew, and were smart enough to fear it. In the years before Eleanor's disappearance, the Blackridge estate had become more than just a mansion. It was a fortress, not the kind built with walls and guards, but with names, marriages, and silent agreements. A fortress of influence, landowners, judges, surgeons, ministers, all of them orbiting the Blackridge family like moons around a dying star, too far gone to escape the gravity. The coal beneath Pennsylvania's soil made fortunes, but it also made bodies. Miners, many of them immigrants, were worked to collapse. Limbs lost, lungs blackened, accidents common, compensation rare. But if a body was recovered, and that's a big if, it was sent quietly to a building on the edge of the Blackridge property. Locals called it the Shed, but it was no tool house. It was a private anatomical theater. Hidden under the banner of medical philanthropy, the Blackridge family funneled bodies to a group known as the Moravian Consortium, a secretive medical circle said to have ties as far back as alchemical Europe. They weren't studying illness, they were engineering compliance. Rumors spread among house staff that strange powders were shipped in from Europe, that priests from obscure orders visited during the dead of night, and that Eleanor had once been found unconscious outside the shed, her wrists marked by needle pricks, her dress stained with something that smelled sweet, but unnatural. When Eleanor began speaking of dreams that felt real and walls that breathed, her mother blamed hysteria, her father blamed reading, and the staff were forbidden from mentioning it. But Eleanor was clever, too clever, and curiosity in elite families is a dangerous affliction. She began drawing what she saw in her dreams, symbols, patterns, a sequence of 7 rooms, each with a purpose. She described voices coming through her bedroom mirror, laughter that wasn't hers, conversations she didn't remember having with people who were never there. And then she made a mistake. She brought one of the drawings to the dinner table. 3 days later, she vanished. No scream, no struggle, no sign, just a single unlit candle, left flickering in room 6. You still think this is just a story? Good. That means they haven't found you yet. Most disappearances leave behind a trail, a broken door, a torn garment, a dropped letter. Eleanor left behind none of those things. What she left was worse. In her dressing room, hidden behind a false wall panel, investigators, the unofficial kind, found 13 pages of writing. Not a journal, not letters, but transcripts. Transcripts of conversations she claimed never to have spoken. You are not where you think you are. They've built time like a house and they hide in the walls. 7 rooms, 7 voices. Only one must remain silent. Each page was dated, precise, obsessively neat, but none of the handwriting matched Eleanor's public letters, her correspondence, her social invitations, her known journals. The pen strokes were harder, angrier, like they weren't written by a woman at all, but through her. Those pages were quietly burned, not by the authorities, but by her brother, Thomas Blackridge, a man who until that moment had no public presence, no photographs, no appearances at social functions, just a name that floated quietly behind company charters and land deeds. Thomas was never listed as an heir. He was never mentioned in Eleanor's speeches or her mother's sermons, but when she vanished, he emerged, not with grief, but with paperwork. He filed a public statement claiming Eleanor had suffered a nervous affliction and had been taken to Europe for treatment. He refused to name the facility. No travel records existed, no ship logs, no tickets. But within a week, the local paper printed a small headline, Miss Eleanor Blackridge to receive private care abroad. Case closed. But something else happened that week. 10 estate workers were dismissed without cause, a coal shaft was sealed, and the shed burned to the ground in the middle of the night, long before the fire brigade could reach it. Witnesses saw no flames, only a thick, black smoke that turned the sky violet. There were no bodies found in the ashes. But something did survive. A brass key, scorched, misshapen but still intact. It bore a single marking, a number, not a company stamp, not a room assignment, just this, 7. Room 7, no plans, no entry, no explanation. But that key now rests in a private archive in Harrisburg under glass, labeled simply, Unclaimed Evidence, Eleanor Case. But ask to view it, and you'll be told it doesn't exist. And if you keep asking, you might disappear too. Let's go back to before the fire, before the cover-ups, before the brass key and the vanished socialite. Let's go back to the party, the last public sighting of Eleanor Blackridge. It was May 16th, 1856. A masquerade held at the Blackridge estate to honor a visiting dignitary from Austria, though no one remembers his name. Strange, isn't it? A man supposedly tied to European nobility, treated as guest of honor by one of America's richest families. And yet, no portraits, no reports, not even a signature in the guest ledger. But there were whispers that he brought with him a leather case no bigger than a shoebox, which he never let out of sight. That he spoke 7 languages fluently, none of them English. That Eleanor was seen speaking to him alone for over an hour, in a room that was supposedly locked. The servants remembered her dress, deep crimson, silk imported from Italy. But more than the dress, they remembered the mask. Unlike the ornate feathered masks of the other women, Eleanor wore a plain white one. No embellishment, no decoration, just a smooth, unbroken surface, and she refused to take it off even during dinner. Some said she was making a statement, others said she was mocking the guests, but the older maids whispered something else. She wasn't wearing the mask was wearing her. That night, after the guests left and the estate fell silent, one of the kitchen boys swore he saw her walking barefoot across the lawn, holding a single candlestick and humming a lullaby that hadn't been sung in decades. He followed her, just far enough to see her disappear into the lower gardens. There, hidden beneath layers of ivy and rosebush, was an iron trap door. Most thought it led to a root cellar. But he watched her unlock it with a key she wore on a silver chain, step inside, and vanish beneath the earth. He never told anyone officially. Just confessed it on his deathbed 60 years later, and he added one last thing. She wasn't alone when she went in. Something was waiting for her, and it knew her name. When workers were sent decades later to excavate the area, they found nothing. No cellar, no trapdoor, just dirt, as if the earth had closed itself up again, protecting whatever secrets had been buried, or whoever. The night was far colder than any servant would dare admit. October in Pennsylvania carries a chill that seeps into bone and memory. Yet on that night the air was unnaturally still, as if time itself paused to witness what happened next. After the party, Eleanor didn't retreat underground again. No, this time she returned to the grand parlor, candlelight flickering against her white mask. There, she stood alone before her own portrait, a towering oil painting of a smiling, confident young woman. But tonight, the eyes in that canvas seemed alive, watching. Eleanor spoke aloud. Not to anyone, not to the aristocrats, not to the servants, not even to the austere Austrian dignitary. She spoke to her own image. Her voice was steady, cold, carrying words that would freeze a man's blood centuries later. Illuminate the corridors no one walks. Reveal the whispers that haunt the wallpaper. Let me be the light. She repeated it 3 times, like a broken incantation, and that's when the walls themselves answered. The wallpaper, heavy, ornate damask imported from England, seemed to shift. A pattern in the fleur-de-lis repeated until it formed a loop, rotating like a spinning wheel when viewed peripherally. Eleanor's candlelight caught a glint, like metal behind the fabric. She reached out, pressed against it, and the damask yielded. A panel slid inward, taking her with it. No footsteps, no voice, just sliding wood, muffled, then silence. The head butler found the panel later that night. He called for help. They tore the wall apart. And there, behind the damask, was a narrow shaft, no wider than a coffin, and a ladder descending into darkness. The ladder's rungs were slick with condensation, and near the wall lay something, stained fabric, crimson, silk, a remnant of Eleanor's dress. But she was gone. No guard saw her leave. No staff admitted to hearing even the faintest creak of the ladder. Not a whisper reached the outside world. The newspapers reported no theft, no disappearance. They wrote of a temporary absence. In polite society, such things were overlooked. That ladder beneath her portrait led to the heart of the estate, below the parlor, through cold tunnels and deeper, into the bowels of a secret network. Rooms carved into bedrock, lit by gas lamps no one knew existed. Chambers with chains, surgical tools, machinery that could grind bone and churn flesh, hidden labs that merged medicine, metallurgy, and alchemy into grotesque experiments. Eleanor emerged, the kitchen boy later said, looking neither frightened nor relieved. Her mask was gone, her dress torn, and her hair stuck to her cheeks with sweat. Her eyes, once bright, were now distant, glazed, as if she'd witnessed something beyond definition. She said nothing, just walked up the ladder, returned the panel, and sat at the table. She burned the damask scrap with her candle, watched it curl into ash, then went to her room and locked the door from within. Silence, again. Dear viewer, you might ask, why did she return? What forced her back? Because the deeper you go into their world, the more you realize something isn't just hidden, it holds you. And Eleanor? She fell, not into a trap, but into a design, a machine built to devour identity, to fracture reality, to transform its subject, and sometimes kill the soul. And now the design has noticed you. The morning after Eleanor's descent was eerily ordinary. Breakfast was served at precisely 7:30 a.m. by staff who knew better than to ask questions. The fireplace in the parlor roared with carefully tended flame. The music room echoed faintly with the tones of a forgotten harp. But those who had seen Eleanor the night before, if only briefly, walked slower, avoided eye contact, whispered in corners. She did not speak of the passage beneath the wallpaper, nor of what lay in the dark stone chambers, yet something had changed. Her eyes no longer searched for company, her movements were mechanical, her meals uneaten, and she had taken to writing, furiously, endlessly, filling pages with symbols, diagrams, and phrases in Latin, German, and something no one could identify. Her journals, it would be said later, did not read like the ramblings of a madwoman. They read like instructions. On the third day, Eleanor called for her father's physician, a man named Dr. Calhoun, known for his clinical brilliance and his near-religious obsession with bleeding-edge science. He arrived just past noon, carrying his black leather bag and a face too blank for comfort. When he left 3 hours later, he looked 10 years older. He would not speak of what Eleanor said to him, but he never returned to the estate. 2 weeks later, his house was found abandoned. No sign of struggle, just a series of burnt pages in the fireplace, and on the wall, scratched in with something sharp. "She knows what we buried." Buried, a word that echoed in the estate like a curse. Because the Armitage estate had secrets beneath its floorboards. Literally. The original foundation was laid atop an older structure, a colonial hospital that had mysteriously burned down in 1792. Few remembered it, and fewer spoke of what was done there. But beneath the wine cellars and servant quarters were sealed brick corridors dated back nearly a century, reinforced with iron and filled with doors that had no keys, rooms that were never catalogued, spaces that architects denied ever building. And Eleanor, she had been there, seen it, touched it. But what truly disturbed those who still cared for her, what made the maids pray in the laundry room and the cook begin to drink again, was Eleanor's voice. It had changed, softer, slower, as if every sentence passed through another consciousness before reaching her lips. And then she began drawing faces, dozens of them, all male, all expressionless, all with the same vacant eyes. No names, just dates, and one word written beneath each. Watcher. By week's end, there were 48 such faces drawn across her walls. None matched anyone in the town records, but when the estate librarian, Mr. Lawton, happened to glimpse the drawings, his face turned white. He trembled, then fled. Because those faces, they were not from town, they were from somewhere deeper. And the watchers, they were never outside looking in. They were already inside. The 7th day marked the first full disappearance. At 2:13 a.m., Jonathan Wren, Eleanor's personal valet, vanished without a trace. He had just delivered a tray of warmed milk and honey to her quarters. He was seen climbing the spiral staircase, candle in hand, head lowered. He was never seen again. No signs of struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, just the tray perfectly placed beside her door, still steaming, untouched. The staff searched, of course, first quietly, then frantically. By dawn, the head butler ordered the estate grounds combed inch by inch. The woods, the cellars, even the attic crawlspace above Eleanor's room, where pigeons had once nested and died. They found nothing, except, behind a loose plank in the northern wall of Eleanor's chamber, a set of fingernail marks, deep, curved, like someone, or something, had tried to claw its way out from the inside. And then came the smell. The scent of burnt rosemary and iron began to permeate the second floor, Eleanor's room especially. The maids said it clung to their dresses, got in their hair, made their skin itch. The gardener swore it followed him out into the orchard. When asked, Eleanor only said, "He stepped too close. They don't like that." They. Not he, not it. They. From that moment on, her speech was marked by pluralities. They whispered last night. They don't like music anymore. They prefer the dark. They're almost ready. The family chaplain, Father Elridge, was summoned. He had known Eleanor since her baptism and refused to believe she was mad. Possessed, perhaps, but not mad. He arrived wearing his crucifix, Bible in hand, incense burner lit. The moment he crossed her threshold, the flame in the burner went out. Just snuffed, like breath across a candle. He stayed with her for 23 minutes. When he left, his robes were soaked in sweat, and he dropped his Bible down the St. Airs. It landed open, face up, on Genesis 6. There were giants in the earth in those days, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men. He refused to return, took ill the next morning, died by the end of the week. The night of his death, Eleanor wrote only one line in her journal. "The blood of the priest thins the veil." And beneath it, a drawing. A spiral staircase descending into a pit of hands, hands not reaching up, but reaching down, as if waiting to pull someone through. The watchers, it seemed, were not idle. They were hungry. After the priest's death, the Blackridge estate transformed from a symbol of wealth into a living mausoleum. The halls, once echoing with music and laughter, grew quieter than a crypt. The chandeliers remained unlit. The tapestries collected dust. Guests stopped calling, and those who did come never returned twice. But inside Eleanor's chambers, the activity only intensified. The servants spoke of strange noises, a rhythmic tapping behind the walls, like long fingernails on wood, footsteps pacing at midnight, yet always too slow, too deliberate to be human, and the birds, once abundant around the garden, vanished entirely, not flown south, just gone. One housemaid, Mary Ann, lasted only 3 days after taking over Jonathan Wren's duties. On her final night, she was found in the hallway outside Eleanor's door, eyes wide, pupils dilated, mouth agape like she had seen something unspeakable. She never spoke again, not a word. She simply sat in a rocking chair in the kitchen, rocking back and forth, day and night, whispering the same phrase over and over, "No mirrors, no mirrors, no mirrors." When they finally searched Eleanor's room again, they noticed something disturbing. Every reflective surface, every mirror, every polished piece of glass had been either removed or shattered. Even the silver had been dulled, tarnished with soot. When questioned, Eleanor simply replied, "They don't like being seen, but they love to see." And still she remained otherwise calm, poised, composed. She wrote daily, ate well, dressed impeccably, but her eyes, according to the butler, had changed. Once a gentle hazel, they now flickered faintly red in candlelight, like embers hiding in ash. Then came the incident in the cellar. Late one evening, a delivery man brought wine crates from a local merchant. He was instructed to store them in the stone cellar beneath the eastern wing. He entered. He had descended, never came back up. The next morning his cart was found overturned outside the estate gates, the horses dead, eyes gouged, tongues removed. The cellars were sealed that day, bricked off, without ceremony, without mention. Eleanor, however, seemed unfazed. In fact, she smiled, not a warm smile, not a human smile, but the kind of smile you see in ancient statues, the kind carved by people who feared the gods they worshipped. And on the 4th night after the cellar's sealing, a letter was found tucked into the spine of her journal. It was unsigned, unaddressed. It read only, "There is no longer an inside and outside. The house is awake, and so is what sleeps beneath." The letter was burned, but the ash kept moving. Even after the flame had died, it was around this time that the clocks began to fail. One by one, the estate's timepieces, grandfather clocks, pocket watches, even the ornate sundial in the garden, ceased to function. Not slowly, not from age or wear, but all at once, as if time itself had been dismissed from the property. At precisely 3:11 a.m. on the 9th night, all the clocks stopped, and stayed stopped. Eleanor noted the moment in her journal with an unsettling calm. The house breathes differently now. It no longer honors the hours. The watchers come when they please. The servants didn't need convincing. They had already begun sleeping in shifts, locking their doors at sundown and refusing to enter certain hallways where the wallpaper seemed to ripple, breathe, when no one else was looking. 2 footmen attempted to flee. They stole horses from the stable and rode out into the dark countryside, but neither made it beyond the eastern tree line. They were found the next day, heads twisted backward, jaws unhinged, eyes fixed toward the mansion, as if something had forced them to look and see. That same evening, Lady Agatha, Eleanor's aging aunt, arrived from Pennsylvania. She had heard of the odd rumors, the vanishings, the death of Father Elridge. Being the only living relative with legal authority over the estate, she declared Eleanor unfit and attempted to take custody of her by force. She lasted 12 hours. According to the final entry in her own travel journal, written in rushed, shaky ink, it wasn't Eleanor that frightened her. It was what Eleanor had become a vessel for. "She speaks in 2 voices now," Agatha wrote. "One speaks of dreams, the other in riddles. Neither is hers." At dawn, Agatha was found seated at the foot of Eleanor's bed, humming a lullaby that no one recognized. Her lips were sewn shut with golden thread. No one claimed responsibility. The house cook fainted on sight and had to be dragged out by the groundskeeper. Agatha was taken to an asylum outside of Pittsburgh, where she would spend the remaining 7 years of her life tracing spirals on the wall with her own blood. Eleanor, for her part, didn't leave her room for 5 more days. When she finally emerged, she was wearing a dress none of the staff recognized, black lace patterned with stitched symbols that matched no known language. The stitching, it was later discovered, was not thread. It was hair. Human. Auburn. Her mother's color. And the voice that greeted the maids that morning was not Eleanor's. It was deeper, ancient, hollow, as though it had waited centuries to speak. And all it said was, "She sleeps." I remember, the 10th night brought thunder with no lightning, low, crawling rumbles that moved beneath the soil, not above, not in the sky. The dogs buried on the property began to claw their way up through the dirt. Some were still intact, others were just bones. The stables reeked of sulfur, horses screamed until their lungs gave out. And in the dead center of the garden, where the old sundial had once stood, a perfectly round sinkhole opened, 9 feet across, depth unknown, blacker than pitch, no sound when you dropped a stone, no echo, no bottom. Eleanor stood at its edge for 3 hours. The maid who watched her said her shadow did not move with the moon. Inside the house, mirrors were turned to face the walls, not out of superstition, but necessity. At least 5 servants reported seeing things in the glass that weren't there in reality. One saw himself standing behind his own reflection, staring blankly. Another saw Eleanor, aged, hollow-eyed, whispering to someone just out of frame. But the house steward, Mr. Whitlow, saw something else entirely. He saw Eleanor's mother. Alive. She stood in the mirror, dressed in burial linens, eyes open wide, whispering in reverse. Her jaw was slack, broken, and her mouth hung open like a gaping wound. And in her palm she held a silver locket, the same one she had been buried with. That night Whitlow locked himself in the East Wing pantry and tried to cut off his ears with a carving knife. When found, he simply said, "She's trying to crawl through the glass." Eleanor, meanwhile, became increasingly cryptic. Her speech fragmented. Her eyes darkened. She stopped blinking. She no longer recognized photographs of herself, claimed they were not quite right, said the smile was someone else's. One night she handed the housemaid a folded parchment sealed in red wax. "Burn this," she said. "If I speak in tongues not heard in the world, burn this and place the ashes beneath my pillow. That will remind me which world I belong to." The maid opened it before burning. It read, "I was born in this skin, but something older has worn it longer. It waits in the roots beneath my cradle, and it remembers how I taste." And the wax seal. It was a perfect spiral of human teeth. Not drawings. Real. Embedded into the wax like relics from a forgotten saint. That night, for the first time since her mother's funeral, Eleanor wept. But the tears were black, thick, and when she wiped them away, they left no trace. On the 11th night, the house began to speak, not in English, not in whispers, but in sounds that came from inside the walls, wet, breathy sounds like lungs that had learned to echo through timber and stone. The pipes moaned with vowels, floorboards clicked in unnatural rhythm, windows didn't rattle from the wind, they sighed when touched. The estate had become an organism. And Eleanor, she was now less inhabitant and more conductor. The staff, what little remained, could no longer tell whether she was waking or dreaming. She walked as though pulled by invisible marionettes. Her fingertips dragged along the banisters, leaving behind smudges that smelled of ash and spoiled milk. The color of her eyes shifted by hour, sometimes green, sometimes black, once silver. She claimed she could hear her mother humming from inside the cellar, even though the door had been boarded shut since the funeral. And then came the letter. No one saw who delivered it. It simply appeared at the breakfast table, beside Eleanor's untouched plate of bread and salt. The envelope was made of pressed bone. The ink smelled like rust and lilac. It was addressed not to Eleanor, but to the vessel of memory and bone. Inside were 6 words. "It is time. Open the corridor." No signature, no explanation, just a brass key, cold to the touch, but damp as if recently swallowed. Eleanor did not hesitate. She took the key and walked directly to the cellar door. The boards gave way like dry leaves. She descended alone, barefoot, wearing only a white shift. Candles lit themselves in her presence. What she found below would never be fully described, only implied. Because she came back up, different. Her mouth moved when she wasn't speaking. Her shadow lingered behind her. She began to mimic the voice of her dead mother with perfect tone and rhythm, but only in complete darkness. The servants asked. No questions. They began to leave, one by one. Those who remained heard Eleanor talking to someone beneath the floor, calling it sister, offering it gifts, teeth, feathers, blood from her wrists, and then she asked them to dig. No reason given, no destination marked. Only this. There is a chamber beneath the earth where all memory is flesh. My mother waits there with the others. You must help me unbury the original name. And the worst part, they obeyed, because something in her voice no longer asked. It commanded. By the 12th night, the earth had been torn open. Behind the orchard, where the soil was soft and red like wounded flesh, Eleanor's few remaining servants unearthed something ancient, not bones, not treasure, but a stone circle buried deep beneath the roots. 11 monoliths, each carved with symbols older than English. Symbols no one recognized, except Eleanor. She named them aloud, one by one, and with each name the temperature dropped, as if a lung buried beneath the land had inhaled sharply. This was no ritual from a book. This was memory that had survived through bloodlines, passed not in words but in wombs. Eleanor now spoke in tongues no scholar could decipher, languages that predated record. Her handwriting no longer resembled anything human. It curled and spun like vines, or veins, or fractures in glass. Her skin began to change too, paler, colder, and marked by small black veins that pulsed only when she read aloud. A priest was summoned, not by her, but by a groundskeeper who fled and returned with help. Father Mendel arrived at dusk. He refused to step past the garden gate, said he saw too many eyes staring back from the windows. Eleanor met him at the edge of the estate, calm, smiling. She kissed the ring on his finger, and it turned black. The priest fell into seizure immediately, foamed at the mouth, screamed in Latin until his tongue split. By morning he was mute. When asked what he saw in her eyes, he wrote one word: origin. The town, now curious and terrified, began to whisper, but no one approached. Everyone remembered what had happened to the Whittaker children a generation before. They remembered the mother. They remembered the screaming from the woods. Inside the house, Eleanor no longer spoke at all. She chanted, ceaselessly, endlessly. At night, villagers claimed they saw lights circling above the property, dim, greenish, lights that moved like insects. No thunder, no wind, just the smell of iron in the air and the feeling of dread so heavy it pressed down on your chest. And beneath it all, the well had begun to boil, not with water, but with teeth, dozens, hundreds, milk teeth, molars, some cracked, some golden, and every single one was engraved with the same marking, a spiral wrapped around a human tongue. The 13th day began with silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that devours sound. No birds, no wind, no crackling from the hearth, not even breath. The entire estate felt suspended, as if time itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to emerge. And then, just before dawn, the digging stopped. Not by decision, but because they hit something soft beneath the earth. Not clay, not roots. Skin. A surface both supple and cold, stretching outward in all directions, living but not alive. It pulsed faintly as if reacting to the presence of human hands. Eleanor knelt beside the excavation and touched it without flinching. And she whispered, "We found her." No one asked who. They knew. The house had been built over a grave, but not for a person, for a being. Something ancient, buried before the land was mapped, before the language of men could name what it feared. The monoliths were not decorative. They were bindings. And now, Eleanor had begun to undo them. One by one, she broke the soil around each stone, reciting incantations that made blood run from the ears of those who heard. Animals within 5 miles fled. Those who stayed, the crows, the rats, the hounds, began to die. But not naturally. Their bodies turned inside out, as if they had heard something they were not meant to survive. In the attic, a mirror shattered without being touched, its shards rearranged into a shape resembling an eye that followed the servants as they walked, an eye that blinked whenever the name Honora was spoken. That name had not been heard in the house for 50 years. It was Eleanor's grandmother, but also something else. A vessel, a conduit, a door, and Eleanor was the key. By nightfall, the earth bled. Crimson liquid poured from the hole in rhythmic pulses, as if the buried thing beneath them had a heartbeat. It smelled of milk, rot, and tea, something floral, like lilies left too long in a sealed box. Eleanor drank from it, and for the first time in weeks, she smiled. Not the smile of a girl, not the smile of a woman, the smile of something that remembered, and the smile of something that had returned. By the 14th night, the house was no longer a house. The walls breathed, literally. Wood expanded and contracted as if the structure itself had grown lungs. Wallpaper peeled itself into the shape of rib cages. Floorboards pulsed with something beneath them, something that wasn't blood, but behaved like it. Those who entered described an overwhelming pressure, like being underwater. Light bent, time stuttered. No one's watch kept the same hour inside as it did outside. Conversations echoed with voices that hadn't spoken them, older voices, not mocking, not angry, just remembering. And Eleanor, she no longer walked, she floated, an inch above the floor at all times, her gown trailing like smoke, her hair moving without wind. Her skin had grown translucent in places, revealing a network of black veins that glowed faintly in the dark. Her eyes weren't eyes anymore. They shimmered with metallic filaments, like the reflection of something deep beneath a frozen lake. The villagers, desperate for answers, sent in 3 men at dusk, former soldiers, armed, paid well. They never returned, except for their hands. Each was found at the edge of the property line, perfectly clean, palms up, as if offering something. One held a locket, one held a key, one held a single human tooth wrapped in red thread. That night, the town held an emergency meeting at the church, but no prayers were spoken, because every Bible in the building had spontaneously turned to Genesis 6:4 and burned. There were giants in the earth in those days. The pastor quit the same evening. When asked why, he muttered something about the daughters of men and the watchers beneath the well. Then he walked into the sea and was never seen again. Eleanor, meanwhile, began speaking again, but never to people, only to mirrors. She would spend hours standing before a mirror, her lips moving, silently, then laughing, softly, like a girl sharing a joke with someone she loved. But the mirrors, they answered. Not in words, in images. Visions of a world beneath this one. Vast, dark, not hell, but the first womb. A place where things were made. Things older than angels, older than sin. And Eleanor was not inviting them back. She was opening the door they had been locked behind. The 15th section begins in silence again, but this time it's not empty. This time, the silence is watching you. That morning, every reflective surface within the manor cracked, not shattered. Cracked, neatly, surgically, as if something had moved behind the glass and pressed too hard. Mirrors, windows, teacups, even a puddle outside the barn. Each now held a web of fractures, shaped like a smile. The servants stopped calling her Eleanor. They couldn't. Her name had weight now, a spiritual density that bent reality whenever it was spoken. The cook tried to say it and fell into seizures. The butler whispered it in prayer and went blind in both eyes. So they called her She, as if the house had grown a queen, and in a way it had. She began rearranging the furniture at night. Not with hands, with thought. Chairs moved, tables floated. Doors that had been locked for 50 years now stood wide open, revealing rooms that had not been there yesterday. One such room was found behind the library shelf. A narrow corridor lined with teeth, not bones, not carvings, actual human teeth embedded in the walls like bricks. Each molar had a single letter carved into its root. Together they spelled one phrase over and over. She was buried before language. And in that hallway, hanging at the very end, was a painting. A portrait of a woman with no face, but every time you blinked, the face would form a little more. Eyes, then lips, then a mouth, then teeth. One of the servants, a young girl named Clara, stood too long before it. She whispered, "She's beautiful." By morning, Clara had cut off her own ears and stitched her mouth shut with a rosary chain. When questioned, she wrote only one sentence in blood. "No more noise. She's almost done speaking." That day, the walls began to weep. Not moisture. Ink. Thick, black, impossible ink, crawling in long tendrils, spelling symbols that no one recognized but everyone understood. The kind of understanding you don't learn, you remember. Eleanor stood at the center of it all, arms raised, eyes closed, and for a brief moment, the entire estate levitated. Not the objects, not just the furniture, the entire house. It floated 6 feet above the ground, and then gently came back down, without a sound. Physics was no longer obeyed. Because something older than physics had awakened. And Eleanor? She was no longer summoning. She was becoming. By now, the Blackwood estate was no longer a house. It was a womb, alive, breathing, preparing. Inside, walls shifted when unobserved. Furniture reassembled itself into crude, human-like forms, mocking guests that no longer came. Time flowed irregularly. Morning could last 10 minutes. Midnight could stretch for days. And in the attic, a new door appeared. A door made of bone. Human spine as its frame. Ribcage for reinforcement. It pulsed faintly, like it was waiting to be born, but no one dared touch it, because Eleanor now spoke in tongues. Not human languages, but something primal. Older than sound, older than sin. She would murmur into corners and rats would slit their own throats. She'd whisper into the soil, and trees outside bent toward her voice like worshippers in prayer. One evening, the town priest, Father Whitmore, arrived unannounced. He was gaunt, hollow-eyed, carrying not a Bible, but a cage. Inside it was a crow, half dead, half alive. Its beak was sealed shut with wax. Its eyes were human. The priest said nothing. He simply opened the cage. The crow flew straight toward Eleanor and stopped mid-air. Frozen, hovering, trembling like a compass at magnetic war. Eleanor did not move. She breathed into it. One slow breath, and the crow burst into flame. Not fire, but light. Pure white light that screamed as it burned. When it was gone, the priest fell to his knees and whispered, "She's not cursed. She's chosen." Then he carved a symbol into his own chest, a perfect spiral starting from the sternum and ending above the heart. He smiled and said, "The spiral is the original scripture, not the cross." Then he walked out into the woods. No one ever saw him again. From that day, the town no longer spoke of Eleanor, not out of fear, but reverence, as if silence were now a form of worship, and those who broke it bled from the eyes that postman, the mayor's wife, a child who asked too many questions, all silenced, all marked by the spiral, and deep in the cellar, a soft heartbeat echoed. But there was no one inside, only soil and bones, and an umbilical cord, made of hair. Because Eleanor was no longer just a woman, she was an altar, and something was about to be born through her. The spiral began to appear everywhere, carved into bark, etched into fogged mirrors, drawn in ash across doorsteps, each time perfectly symmetrical, as if traced by something without a hand. No one admitted to making them, but everyone saw them. Children stopped playing outside. Dogs refused to cross certain thresholds. Crows gathered on rooftops in unnatural numbers, never moving, never blinking, just watching. And deep within the woods behind the Blackwood house, a clearing opened, overnight. In the center stood a stone circle that hadn't been there before, not built, revealed. Like the earth had exhaled a secret it had buried for centuries. Villagers who wandered too close described hearing lullabies in a voice that was unmistakably Eleanor's, only younger, as if sung by her unborn self. Several collapsed. One man slit his own mouth into a smile he couldn't stop. Another walked into the stones and vanished, leaving only his shadow, burned into the ground. The town sheriff tried to seal the estate. He brought deputies, guns, a priest. They surrounded the Blackwood house at dawn. By dusk, only one man remained, the youngest deputy. He was found kneeling outside the front porch, eyes rolled back, murmuring, "It's not a house, it's a placenta, and she's the last daughter of the first mother. She's bringing her back." When asked who he meant, he simply opened his mouth. A spiral of blood poured out onto his chest. He died smiling. And inside the attic, the door of bone now hummed, audible to the entire town. It pulsed in rhythm with Eleanor's heartbeat. But here's what broke what little sanity remained. Eleanor was no longer seen in the house. Instead, she appeared in dreams. One by one, townspeople began reporting the same vision. A staircase that spiraled downward, infinitely, into a void not of darkness, but flesh. At the bottom, Eleanor. Eyes glow, hands open, whispering, "Come back to the womb. You were never born. You were only imagined." The mayor hanged himself that night. His note read, "She's not haunting us, she's remembering us, and we don't belong here anymore." No one dared go near the Blackwood house after that. But the heartbeat? It kept growing louder, as if something inside the walls was waking up. Something vast, something maternal, and very, very hungry. The air itself had changed. Heavier, thicker, like the very atmosphere around the Blackwood estate had become pregnant with something unspeakable. Radios within a mile radius stopped working. Clocks ticked backward. Birds flew in perfect spiraling formations over the house, then dropped dead in unison. And the soil? It began to pulse. Not metaphorically, literally. Locals described seeing the ground around the property breathe, rising and falling in sync with that impossible hum emanating from the attic door of bone. Grass turned white. Trees wept sap the color of blood. And all the while, the spiral kept appearing, on clothes, under fingernails, even inside people's eyes. No matter where you looked, the spiral was looking back. Then came the first night of sleepwalking. It began with just a handful of townsfolk, mostly elderly, mostly frail. They rose in the middle of the night, walked silently out their front doors, and made their way toward the Blackwood house. None remembered it, but they all woke up with dirt under their feet and blood in their beds. By the end of the week, over 47 people had done it. And on the 7th night, the sheriff's daughter, just 8 years old, walked straight into the woods barefoot, humming a lullaby no one had taught her. She was found standing inside the stone circle. Not crying, not afraid, just smiling. Her skin had changed, translucent, pale. Her eyes solid black like polished obsidian. When her father rushed to pull her away, she looked up at him and said in a voice not her own, "You took her body, now she'll take yours." That night, the sheriff shot himself in the heart. But not before setting fire to the chapel. Why? Because the stained glass had changed. It now depicted Eleanor, with wings, horns, and a spiral halo, kneeling beside a crib made of roots and bone. Inside the crib, a mirror. Reflecting every member of the town back at themselves as infants, naked, screaming. The message was clear. This wasn't about death. It was about unbirth. The Blackwood estate was no longer haunted. It had become a womb for something ancient, something that wants to remember us so it can reabsorb us. And Eleanor, she was no longer the girl they feared. She was the doorway. 3 days before the disappearance of the entire east wing of the Blackwood estate, a priest broke in. Not a local, not even from the country. His name never appeared in any registry, no ID, no passport, just a man dressed in scorched robes, dragging a case of salt and a rusted blade covered in script that predated Latin. He claimed the land wasn't cursed. It was remembering itself. He said the Blackwoods had built their home atop a ley fracture, a wound in the crust of the earth where memory bled into form, where forgotten archetypes took shape, where reality bent under the weight of what had been buried before the first man ever dreamed. He didn't want to kill Eleanor. He wanted to seal her, so he entered the house. And for the next 22 hours, the house made no sound, no wind, no creak, no scream, until exactly 3:33 a.m. Then the doors flew open, and he came running out, eyes burned out of his skull, hands raw from clawing at his own face, chanting a single phrase over and over through blood-choked sobs. She is not a child. She is the echo of the one who fell before the first fall. He dropped dead at the property line. No wound, no mark, just gone, like something reclaimed him. And what of Eleanor? She stood at the top of the staircase, barefoot, arms folded across a chest that now bore 7 glowing sigils. Each one corresponded to a sin that never made it into the Bible. Sins not of action, but of perception. Sins like remembering what you weren't meant to, hearing music that predates sound, feeling the presence of something you didn't invite inside you. And the East Wing? It disappeared the next day. Not collapsed, not destroyed, just missing. Windows gone, rooms gone, whole hallways vanished. Walls were sliced clean, as if carved from existence by a hand that understood dimensional surgery. But here's what no one could. It explained. A man walking his dog swore he saw the missing wing, floating above the trees at sunset, shimmering like heat off asphalt, windows open, lights on, people moving inside, people with no faces. They moved like puppets with invisible strings, mouths opening and closing to mimic lives they never lived. And in the topmost window, Eleanor, still watching, still whispering. She was no longer in the house. She was the house, or rather, she had become what the house had always wanted to remember. They called in the government. Not officially, of course. 3 black cars, no plates, 1 woman in gray, 2 men in suits that didn't wrinkle. One spoke Russian like it was his first language. The other didn't speak at all. They spent exactly 9 hours and 11 minutes inside what remained of the Blackwood estate. When they exited, none of them looked at each other. They burned their clothes on sight. They smashed their phones with small silver hammers, and the woman in gray, she made a call from a rotary device in the trunk of the car. It connected before the first ring finished. She said 4 words and nothing more. Category 9, confirmed resonance. Then they vanished. No report, no documentation, no witness statements. But the town changed. The birds stopped nesting. The dogs refused to go near the property line. And the children started humming in their sleep, a melody none of them could name, but all drew the same shape when asked to describe it, a spiral with 7 points. A local man named Carter Simmons tried to camp nearby to expose the feds. He went live on a handheld camera, raving about mind control and occult symbols. 3 minutes into the feed, he screamed once, then stood perfectly still for 46 minutes. Silent. Not blinking, just staring directly into the lens. When he finally spoke again, it wasn't in his voice. It wasn't in anyone's voice. The sound was layered. Male, female, child, and something else. Something that reverberated inside the bones of those who watched. "We are not your enemy," it said. "We are the memory of your forgetting. We gave your kind language, then regret, then God. Now we return to collect what was buried in your sleep." The video glitched, froze, ended. The original file is gone. But dozens of people who saw it before the takedown claim they had the same dream that night, standing in the empty east wing of a mansion that doesn't exist, and being offered a door with no wall around it. The only choice? Open it, or wake up never knowing what you left behind. And the worst part? Some of them didn't wake up at all. The town emptied itself, not through panic, not through warning, but through silence. One by one, the houses went dark, doors left wide open, food still warm on stoves, horses found wandering the roads alone, eyes wide with terror. Diaries were left behind, but every entry, no matter the author, ended with the same last line. "She remembers me now." But who was remembering? Because Eleanor was no longer Eleanor. And the thing growing inside the remains of the Blackwood estate, if it could still be called that, wasn't just alive. It was gestating. The spiral was no longer a symbol, it was a map. Each turn represented a phase in the forgetting of man, each curve a layer of veiled history, and at the center, not a being, not a deity, but a truth. One that could only be experienced through regression, not evolution. That's why the children were humming lullabies, why the men walked into the woods and buried their own names, why the spiral appeared inside people's eyes and behind mirrors, and in the whispering of dead leaves, because this was a return, not to the past, but to the before. The government agents didn't return, but another did. A woman dressed in 19th century mourning clothes, face veiled, hands gloved. She walked down the main street of Blackwood Hollow, barefoot. Her feet never touched the ground. Behind her trailed the echo of a baby crying. Only there was no baby. When confronted by a survivor, she said this: "Do you remember the world before your mother named you? Because it remembers you." That night, a pulse went out from the estate. Not sound, not light. Something else. Something within. Clocks exploded. Glass cracked. Teeth fell out of mouths. All dreams became the same dream, floating in blackness. Hearing the sound of breath before breath was invented, feeling the cold touch of memory before bodies were born, and seeing a face made of your own regrets, smiling. The next morning, the estate was gone. Not destroyed, gone. Replaced by a lake that reflected nothing, just a dark, still surface with no ripples and no bottom. No one has entered it since. But they say if you stand at the edge long enough, you'll hear crying, not from the lake, but inside you. Because part of you knows. It never ended. It only began. They buried the records. They erased the census. They redrew the maps to exclude Blackwood Hollow, but memory is not so easily killed. A century later, the name surfaced again, quietly, on the lips of those who speak in footnotes and whispers. Deep web forums, banned anthropology texts, a single line scribbled in the margins of a Harvard archive. The mother of the spiral was never human. Those who found it and dug deeper didn't last long. 3 went mad. 1 went missing. The last was found inside an iron closet, all the words of his final research carved into his skin, backwards. And still, the truth drips through. Here's what they don't want you to know. Eleanor Blackwood was the final vessel in a line of women born to carry something ancient, older than breath, older than flesh, older than sin. Not a demon, not a god. Something before both, something humanity once knew and was forced to forget. The spiral was not evil. It was a reminder, a trigger embedded in the collective unconscious to awaken what we buried beneath language and fear. The Blackwood line didn't end. It simply changed form, moved from womb to dream, from bloodline to thought, from mansion to memory, and every generation it returns, Not in haunted houses, not in rituals, but in the cracks of reality. The moments when you forget where you are, the faces you swear you've seen before, the feeling that something inside you is watching you, because it is. They've named it many things: the hollow star, the voice beneath, the first womb, the spiral mother, but names are only cages. And now the dream has become too loud to ignore. People report seeing doors where none exist. Children wake up speaking ancient tongues, and mirrors no longer reflect what's in front of them, but what's beneath you. Blackwood was never just a place. It was a threshold. And now that you've heard the story, and you've stepped over, something inside you has remembered. It doesn't want worship. It doesn't want destruction. It only wants one thing: for you to stop pretending you're alone in your mind, because you never were. You were born with it. You'll die with it. And if you listen closely tonight, just before sleep takes you, you'll hear it humming, not to haunt you, but to bring you home.